Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Iraq descending into chaos amidst political turmoil and anger against Iran. Will the crisis spill over across the region? Meantime, Iran renewing threats against Israel and the West as they back away from the renewed JCPOA nuclear deal. And later, Palestinian Authority President Abbas once again on the chopping block, recent events sparking renewed dissatisfaction with the PA leader, as well as efforts to find his successor. An hours-long siege finally ending Tuesday morning as IDF troops move in to arrest two wanted terror suspects. ILTV's Kayla Eberlin reporting.
An all-out firefight breaking out near Nablus, or Shrem, in the West Bank Tuesday morning. Israeli troops entering the village of Rajib in search of two Palestinian terror suspects wanted in connection to a shooting attack near Joseph's Tomb last Friday. The raid lasting for several hours, however, as the suspects barricading themselves in their home and firing at the IDF, while dozens of Palestinians also rioting and attacking the troops from the outside. Eventually, though, with the help of an anti-tank missile and mediation from one of the suspects' fathers, the pair surrendering, both they and their weapons taken into custody. And all this among a number of other arrest raids, some 12 suspects in total and their weapons detained overnight, while no IDF troops were harmed. Meantime, this also coming just hours after another attack near Joseph's Tomb. Two civilians wounded when their car came under fire en route to the shrine. This after failing to coordinate their visit with the security forces, and the IDF now searching for the culprits.
Moving north to Iraq now. An apparent civil war breaking out in Baghdad following the resignation of political leader and Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. Al-Sadr's supporters taking over the parliament and the palace buildings and fighting to push foreign influences out of the country, namely Iran. Joining me to discuss is Middle East expert and researcher at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, Dr. Mordechai Kedar. Dr. Kedar, thanks for being with us now. UN peacekeeping forces have essentially left the Green Zone. There's fighting in the streets, at least 15 dead and hundreds wounded. Is this a new so-called Arab Spring or Arab Autumn, given the season?
No, it actually shows that everybody who is involved in what happens in Iraq, except for Iran, of course, actually gives up. The fact that Muqtada Sadr declared that he is going out of politics, it means that he is fed up with the failure of politics to calm Iraq down. And look, what happened is actually a few months ago, the supporters of Iran failed in the elections. And there was supposed to be a government which will represent the Arab part of Iran rather than those who are behind Iran. However, Iran with its militias did not allow or didn't enable the parties to work freely. And there's no government there, therefore. So Muqtada Sadr, who once was a friend of the Iranians, but now became their enemy, he said, okay, if politics cannot work, I'm getting out of politics. So all his supporters streamed to the streets in order to show that they will not give up to the Iranians.
Well,
and this is actually now against Iran.
Well, but al-Sadr's resignation came after he led his supporters into the parliament buildings and a number of other popular protests. Was it maybe a calculated move to cause such an eruption, and then maybe once things calm down, as they have started to calm down already in the Green Zone, maybe al-Sadr will return to politics?
Yes, no doubt. He knew that if he declares that he is leaving politics, means that he's fed up with politics and he cannot deal with politics anymore. All his supporters, who actually were his forces, real forces with guns and everything, they will definitely fight in order to make sure that he comes back to politics in order to be one of the leaders of the country. So he declared it. So they actually act according to what he expected. They bursted into the green zone, and now he's telling them to come out after everybody understood that they are not giving up. And now, as much as I heard, he is on a hunger strike in order to calm the situation
Exactly.
down.
All right, well, there seems to be clear Israeli interest in supporting al-Sadr's faction in order to disrupt the Iranian corridor of influence in the Middle East. How might Israel step in? Do you think Israel will get involved at all?
No. I would advise to any Israeli to keep away from Iraq, because Iraq, you know what happens there today. You never know what will happen there tomorrow. And Iraq is a swamp of problems that nobody with the right mind wants to go into this after the Americans actually destroyed Saddam Hussein in 2003 and thus pushed the country into a havoc and the mayhem which we see until this very day.
Do you think that al-Sadr's supporters will succeed now or in the near future in actually expelling Iranian or American or other foreign influences from the country?
It all depends on how resolute they are. If they will declare a war, real war against Iran and against those who support Iran, the militias in Iraq, first of all, it might lead to a civil war in Iraq, but only by this way they can get rid of all those, I would say, the parts of the Iraqi tentacle of the Iranian octopus.
All right, so again, how do you see this playing out? And will Iran's influence, or rather Iran's influence is spilling into Syria and Lebanon as well, we know, and those nations are looking very closely at the events in Iraq. How do you think that this might spill over or affect those nations?
Look, Syria anyway is a mayhem. Lebanon is a country which is held in the pocket of Hezbollah, of the Iranian mercenary. So I think that the only country which still can do something against Iran is Iraq, mainly because of the hatred vis-a-vis Iran, hatred to Iran from the Shia Arabs. And this is what it's amazing. The fact that they are Shia does not make them necessarily supporters of Iran. On the contrary, they are Shia Arabs and they are very much proud about being Arabs, and the last thing on earth, they want to be subjugated to the Iranian regime. So, of course, Iran has some influence there, no doubt. Yet, I think that the majority, especially within the younger generation, they don't want to be seen under the Iranian regime, because they see exactly what happens to any country which becomes under the auspice or under the hegemony of Iran, like Lebanon, like Syria, like Yemen, and maybe Gaza as well.
All right, Dr. Mordechai Kedar, thank you so much for your insights. Now it's 2 steps forwards and 1 step back with Tehran this week, as the Ayatollah regime is still threatening Israel, as well as the future of the JCPOA nuclear deal. Earlier expected to come closer to an agreement, Iran is now seemingly stepping back from the JCPOA by renewing previously dropped demands to end the IAEA probes into radioactive traces discovered at undisclosed sites. Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi raising the renewed demands Monday evening during a rare press conference to mark his first year in office. But a party to the International Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, Iran is obligated to explain the radioactive materials, and the United States and other P5+1 signatories are holding firm on getting Iran to respond to the IAEA inquiry. Then, in another step away from the JCPOA nuclear agreement, Tehran is activating 3 cascades of advanced centrifuges at the Natanz nuclear plant and enriching uranium to 5%. Now, Iran is enriching uranium beyond 60%, so this may not be as concerning, but while comparatively low, 5% is still above the 3.6% limit detailed in the original nuclear deal. Also, 3.6% is the maximum enrichment needed to generate electrical power, while 60% is a short technical step away from the 90% purity needed for a bomb. Israeli officials, meantime, coinciding with these revelations, repeating that Iran cannot be trusted and that Israel will do everything needed to keep Tehran from nuclear weapons. Further, to that end, former Mossad head Yossi Cohen divulging countless operations against Iran's nuclear program conducted during his term.
First, We needed to ensure that the State of Israel and the world knew exactly what Iran was doing, when, and where, and how. This we did. Second, we needed to do what had to be done to destroy, to disrupt, and to wreck Iran's plans to build the bomb. This we did too.
And on top of Israeli efforts, the United States CENTCOM reportedly planning to up its military activities against Iranian forces in the Middle East, regardless of a new nuclear deal. But Iran threatening both Israel and the United States to back off or else. With respect to Israel, Raisi saying that if Jerusalem follows through on its missions, then, quote, we will see if anything from the Zionist regime will remain or not, end quote. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is long suffering from a crater-low approval rating in the Palestinian Authority, not only because he's in the 17th year of a 4-year term, nor only because of his age and serious health issues, but also because of unpopular politics at home and dictatorial crackdowns on dissidents. So once again, Abu Mazen under internal pressures to resign and to name a potential successor. With more, as former Director General of the Ministry for Strategic Affairs and Senior Fellow with the JCPOA, or Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, Brigadier General Reserves Yossi Cooper-Wasser. Brigadier General, thank you very much for being with us. I feel like a broken record asking this question, but is Abbas's term finally up?
Well, every day makes us closer to the end of his term by one day. That's what we can say about it. Nobody knows when this is going to come to an end. He is, as you mentioned, on the 17th year of his 4-year term, and he has no intentions to leave, as far as one can tell. He is still committed to getting the situation of the Palestinians even better, and that's not easy to be done, and he doesn't believe that anybody can do that better than he does. So that's why he stays in power and makes sure that his real opponents, Hamas, and his opponents from within Fatah, like Dahlan and Barouti, and others like Nasser al-Kidwa, are not going to take his seat and overrule his ability to lead the Palestinians.
All right, well, so you already mentioned some of the potential rivals to Abbas. A big reason to delay Fatah elections until now and conferences has been to keep political opponents like jailed convicted terrorist Marwan Barghouti from assuming more influence. What's changed since then?
Nothing has changed. He's still committed to prevent that from happening. He's still working very hard.
Well, but what's changed within what's changed within Fatah to try and pressure Abbas into giving up control regardless of his fears?
No, he's not giving up control. He's just pointing at the people that he would like to see replacing him in the future, which are the couple of very close loyalists to him, Majid Faraj, the head of the security forces, and Hussein Sheikh, the person who's in charge of civilian affairs, or was in charge of civilian affairs. Now he has more responsibilities. And these are the people that, Abbas wants to take over once he leaves. But he has no immediate intentions to leave. He's just making sure that if he leaves without any early warning about it, that these people are going to be in place to hold the Palestinian Authority where he wants it to be.
All right, well, there are fears that the Palestinian Authority, under such pressures internally, could actually collapse. Hamas, for example, is encouraging more violent resistance against Israel, which they hope could expedite such an eventuality. What do you think about that?
Well, it is a possibility. There are many possibilities. The most prominent possibility at this point is that somehow Majid Faraj and Hussein Sheikh will manage to hold, because they control the security forces. They have forces loyal to them in most places. These forces are not strong enough really to control everything, but they are strong enough to hold back against all kinds of opponents that may try to replace them. That is one thing that is potentially going to happen. The other options are that the rivals within Fatah will start fighting each other,
right.
And each one of them has a small army of his own, and they can start a situation that's going to look like total chaos. And in each city in the areas controlled by the Palestinian Authority, different elements have greater capabilities and force. So every city can end up in a different situation. You can have Tirawi controlling Nablus, Rajub controlling Hebron, Faraj controlling Ramallah, and so on and so forth, and Islamic Jihad controlling Jenin. That's one reasonable end state that can come up if Abbas leaves tomorrow.
Well, that kind of really reminds me of my next question, in that how much control does the Palestinian Authority, does Fatah for that matter, actually even have over the different regions in the West Bank? Because we know, for example, that many of the arrested terror suspects in the West Bank have been identified as Islamic Jihad or Hamas operatives, but then later photos will come out and show that they're actually part of the Fatah or the Palestinian Authority security forces.
Well, Fatah today is a conglomerate of many elements that adhere to the same idea, but do not follow the same leaders. And this was, by the way, the case for quite a long time. This is the reason why they failed in the elections in 2006. They were divided, and Hamas was united, and that's how Hamas won the elections. That's nothing is new in this respect. Fatah is very much suffering from this internal rift between the different elements. That said, the Palestinian Authority, with its forces, has some control over most of the territories, but not full control. And they like it like that. I mean, they don't feel that this is something they really have to do something about. Even if it's going to be a little bit costly, it's not the end of the world. If necessary, we can do that for at least a period of some period of time.
All right, Brigadier General Kupa Vasil, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Moving on, the Israel Post, mired by financial crises and very poor reviews, now moving closer to privatization. Israel hoping that its issues will be resolved by pushing the postal services into the private sector by 2024. But will it? And what does that actually mean for the average Israeli citizen? Dr. Alex Coman, value creation expert with the Academic College of Tel Aviv Jaffa, here now with the analysis. Dr. Coman, it's great to be back with you. Let's start at the beginning. Why is the Post in such dire straits financially, and is there no other way to save it than privatization?
Well, there was a major effort to try to get a hybrid situation for the Post, so that it would be part of the government, and at the same time, it would have initiatives and entrepreneurial spirit that you get from private sector. This failed. The best example is what happened recently, because what we see is during technology, people send fewer and fewer letters, so letters are going down. And at the same time, packages, people bringing in packages from AliExpress, Amazon, etc., are growing. From an entrepreneurial point of view, this is fantastic because you make more money shipping these packages. If you think about bachelor's days and all these events, Israel Post has a great difficulty handling these things. So rather than viewing it as an opportunity, it views it as a calamity. And it has great difficulty managing the peak demand, which normally would be an opportunity. So that's why they're looking for a way to bring in private owners and let it fly.
Well, so once it's privatized, who will actually own and operate the Postal Service, and what guarantees of services will citizens have, especially in new or small or remote communities?
Well, one thing is obvious, and the same thing was done. The same thing we saw with television, for instance. Television was central government, and then we had those channels, and the channels or cable companies, they were committed to providing service to remote locations, even if it was not economical for them. So they were committed to bring in cable to the Golan Heights, for instance, or other areas where normally they would not do it, but that was part of their charter. The same thing is true about private bus companies that are forced to provide service to remote points. So it's very easy to understand that whoever buys this business would be committed to provide service all over the country, and they would not be able not to do that. I wouldn't be concerned about that.
So what about the cost to consumer? Because it sounds like postal services, the cost of postal services will go up in the end, no? After all, private companies are in it for the profits, and even if the government holds a contract with these new owners, they'll be paying with tax money for the basic services.
Well, the thing, we saw an interesting phenomenon in the States. In the States, you had the U.S. Postal Service, but at the same time, you had Federal Express and United Parcel Service and DHL, other companies play in the same arena. And the nice thing was that you had different levels of service. So if you were not concerned about duration of your package arriving at its destination, or you wanted the lowest price, you would use U.S. Mail. But if you were insistent on quality, you would probably use Federal Express or whatever. I would assume that a similar thing would happen in Israel. If you're sending things and you're not concerned about the time when they arrive, or certainty that they will actually arrive at all, you would probably get a low-level service, which would be relatively cheap. And if you insist that it reach its destination within 24 hours, you would pay more. One of the things that frustrated the public was that that Israel Post offered a 24-hour service, but it did not arrive in 24 hours. Very often it arrived much later.
If at all, I think is one of the major issues with,
exactly.
right? I mean, that's one of the biggest complaints with the Israel Post. And again, the government seems confident that this will happen. Do you think it's a good idea, rather than trying some other method to maybe fix the Israel Post? Because there's not a lot of precedent for this. To my knowledge, there are only 4 other nations with privatized post: Germany, the UK, Japan, and Portugal.
Well, but the thing is that post is declining in importance because of electronic communications. Right. More and more information that you receive arrives in digital form. You're talking about bills, things of the sort, invitations to events like weddings or whatever. So the really the weight of the post in the country is declining. The same thing happened again with telephone services. When telephone services were centralized by Israel's Bureau of Communications, it was impossible to get a phone in your home. There was you had to wait years for service. And now that it's privatized, they are basically competing for you. That's what we should hope if we have a right agreement in the privatization of this process.
All right, Dr. Alex Cohen, thank you again so much. Now, looking into education, many Israelis and Jews in the diaspora are increasingly feeling separated from their culture and their traditions. But there are active efforts to reverse this trend. With over 1 million Israelis living life permanently abroad, some argue that for the Jewish people, this spells disaster due to the low rates of return back to Israel, especially amongst second and third generations of Israelis born abroad. And this also poses a challenge for Jewish traditions to be preserved when Jewish communities in cities across America are so small. With private education, the tuition alone, even for grade school, could easily put college tuition to shame. So if some families' only option is to send their kids to public schools, this poses a problem with those who wish to pass on their connections to their Jewish heritage. So what is there to do for these families that want to keep their Jewish religion alive through their children? Well, that's where Chinuch Yehudi comes into play. Chinuch Yehudi is here to try to bridge that financial gap by providing Jewish and Israeli families scholarships and grants towards their children's Jewish learning. Take Morris, for example, who left Israel 3 years ago to work in Silicon Valley. He didn't find it necessary to spend the money on Jewish education for his children, so he decided to send them to public school. But only to have his kids bullied and yelled at to go back to Israel, or some even telling them that Zionists aren't welcome. Or how about Mika, a young girl that moved from Tel Aviv with her parents to the States, only to have her life being threatened at public school, which nevertheless made her parents rethink their decision and hurried up, send her to a private Jewish school, despite the crazy expensive prices. All of this to say that Jewish education can be attainable to all families across the states thanks to Chinuch Yehudi. So if you or someone you know would like to find out more about this organization, make sure to check out their website at the link below. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. The forecast is calling for clear skies across the country this evening, with lows averaging 23 degrees Celsius or 73 Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, seeing partly cloudy skies around most of the country alongside scorching top temperatures of 39 Celsius again, or 103 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's all for today's news. But for more updates from Israel on all of your devices, check out our website, ILTV.tv, and subscribe to our newsletter, as well as to our streaming platform, ILTV+. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.